Hi, good morning. My name is Johanna Frisbee, and I am with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. I am their administrative and programs coordinator, and so part of that includes the Climate Justice Household Program, which we're going to engage with today. If you hit next, we'll have a little agenda for this morning, just to help us with time. So we'll start with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll go through the Climate Justice Household Program, and then we'll go into our fun breakfast activity with carbon and Cheerios, and then brainstorming for a new future together. So starting with a land acknowledgement, I invite you to just plant both of your feet on the ground and take a deep breath. Invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze as we just feel ourselves in this moment and connect ourselves to this land. In Minnesota, we are located on the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe and Dakota peoples. Here, specifically, the Dakota peoples. And as we go through this morning talking about climate justice, remembering that that includes our neighbors and the original stewards of this land and how we be in better relationship with each other and with ourselves and the land. All right, thank you for grounding with me. Next. So what is the Climate Justice Household Program? The Climate Justice Household Program offers tools and resources for households to take steps towards climate justice, which includes reducing your carbon footprint and building community. We have been adjusting the program to better fit people's needs, and that's turning into a checklist to help people on a year-long journey for what makes sense to take steps in the MNIPL's Three-Legged Stool, so the practical, systemic, and relational, which we'll get into later. But it really is the focus that climate justice begins at home, with tools to look closely at your carbon footprint, energy policy, advocacy, relationship building, but really how you and yourself and your household are able to dig in. And that starts in your household, but then goes beyond and into community, like what you're talking about, can extend further and hopefully help federally as well, but really bringing our hearts into the work. And the goal is to make a plan and build skills to follow it. Next. So that three-legged stool that I mentioned, I know you all here have been connected with MNIPL before. Have you heard of the three-legged stool? I see some nods. So three-legged stool is all about having a holistic movement towards climate justice. So instead of just focusing on the practical or the systemic, it's bringing it all together. Because when I do this presentation with kids, I especially like to say, like, what would happen if you took one of the legs of the stool away? What would happen? You'd fall right down, you'd end up on the ground. So it's important to have three legs of the stool supporting you so you don't, it just helps have a more well-rounded approach. So practical action helps with solutions like energy efficiency and solar, whatever you can do practically in your household or in your community. Systemic change supports strong energy justice policies locally and statewide. And then relational and spiritual is coming together as a community, and how I like to describe it is filling up that heart component. Because when you just focus on the practical or systemic, it can feel really draining and sometimes disheartening. But it's all comes together to help sustain the movement for the long run. So the Climate Justice Household Program helps bring those together, but for you and your household. Next. So backing up a little bit, I want us to just ground ourselves in what is climate justice? Have you all heard of climate justice before? According to this definition, which it seems pretty well-rounded, but it is a pretty broad definition, it's a growing global movement to address the climate crisis with leadership from youth and frontline communities. And the people experiencing devastation of climate crisis are often the least responsible for it. So we can even see that in our own communities, like in North Minneapolis has the worst air quality in the whole state. And that's not due to North Minneapolis, but due to policies that put the HERC in that neighborhood and cause really poor air quality and other systemic injustices. But I really like this symbol for climate justice using the sunflower because it has components that lead to this really broad movement. So it's also about racial equity and clean air and housing security, because when we have a safe, livable community, that's not just for our climate, but also for our communities as well. It's all connected. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your understanding of climate justice as well, and what you've heard or understand it to be as well.
So I've heard about it a lot, and the sunflower there adds a whole lot of pieces that I have typically. So to me, it was like what we said about North Minneapolis and places surrounded by freeways, moving more fields and stuff like that. And it's not equal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I said HERC, and I should have explained that more. But HERC is what burns trash to create energy, but there's a reason it's in North Minneapolis is because they proposed it to be in this. Maybe I'm getting too into it, but yeah. So it's in North Minneapolis, so they have much higher rates of asthma and just the worst air quality in the state. I think that's the Hennepin County recycling center.
There's mother living in the
Whoa, that's exciting. Oh my gosh. Wow, that's so funny. I was like, is it a bird? Is it a squirrel? That's so funny. Any other, we'll continue to talk about climate justice throughout this presentation, but any other notes from folks, like what you've heard before or bringing into this space? Thank you for sharing, you two, as well. I find sometimes even with working in the movement, like, how do you define climate justice? Because it can be so broad, but it's nice to engage in conversation about it. So I want us to do an activity together where we're going to identify our shared carbon footprint, just to get an idea of what our relationship is with consumption. And then so that's going to look really closely at individual, but then we're going to take a step back and look at systemic, because we know the climate crisis is not our individual responsibility, even though we do each play a role in our community, but I think it's helpful to take a step back and look at the systemic as well. So has anyone ever done a carbon calculator before? Good. Okay. It's always exciting when it's people's first carbon calculator. And then since this is being recorded, there will be a link for folks to do this on their own. But since we're in person, we'll just share the answers. So there's 13 questions. And this one is really fun because it's just kind of a broad overview to get an idea. There are a lot more detail-oriented carbon calculators, which with this program, we used to have people do and encourage people to do. And some people are like, it's as arduous as doing taxes. And I was like, okay, we don't want that. But for people who really do like details and like to know, and it can help when you know your specific carbon footprint, and if that's what's motivating for you to be like, okay, I can take these actions and lower the number, that is definitely encouraged. But I am one of those people that finds it as arduous as doing taxes. So I think there are other ways to engage with it as well. So this is a fun, easier way than putting in all those numbers from like a year-long energy bill. I've done this presentation on Zoom was how I developed it, and then trying to transfer it to in person, and then some now with the hybrid, it's like, wow. So there's always some adjustments. So no worries. Cool. All right, so we are going to, it looks a little small, but I'll help us read too. I wonder if I can make it bigger. Boop, boop, boop. So smart. Okay. We're going to take the first step. So, like I said, there are 13 questions, and what I'd love for us to do in this space together is take turns answering the question just to the best of our abilities. And so for this first question is about food. Can I make it bigger? Yes. Okay. So how often do you eat animal-based products? Animal-based products means beef, pork, chicken, fish, eggs, and dairy products. And we can add details to improve accuracy just if we want to. But again, just a rough idea. Could I ask you to answer this question? Yeah, so if we want to, awesome. So meat daily? Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it says dairy products. So we can add details to improve accuracy. And so if we want to then like, I eat cheese every day. Or, well, maybe not every meal. But yeah, so you can go through this and kind of answer these questions to what makes the most sense for you. And again, it's just to kind of get an idea. So thank you for, where did my mouse go? There we go. For answering that. We're very active. Perfect. Next question, also about food. How much of the food that you eat is unprocessed, unpackaged, or locally grown? Could I ask you to answer that question for the group? Yeah. And in Minnesota too, it definitely depends on the season for some of us, right? Like when you can get unprocessed or unpackaged, locally grown. So we'll do fresh, unpackaged. Bananas make up maybe the morning, so a little bit. Perfect. And then locally grown, do you have an estimate? Mm-hmm. That is A-okay. Thank you for answering that question. So they define locally grown as 200 miles away. And sometimes that is hard to find, especially in Minnesota. But I was about to go off on a tangent. But I think this question is really interesting. So thank you for answering it. All right, next question is about housing. Which type best describes your home? So we have freestanding, no running water, freestanding, running water, multi-story apartment, duplex, row house, or building with multiple units, or luxury condominium. Could you answer the question for us? I'm behind, sorry. I think so. This one is a little bit awkward to answer, but I think that makes the most sense. So the next question, also about housing, is what material is your house constructed with? Could you answer the question? Ray, I see on your name tag. Wood. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Mostly. And then how many people live in your household? Could you answer that question? 3. And then do you know the size of your home by square foot? Perfect. Doop, doop, doop. There we go. That's close. Thank you. All right. This we can all answer together. I'm almost 100% certain we can answer confidently that we all have electricity in our home. And then and go back to you. Do you know how energy efficient your home is? And this is kind of, there we go, add information. So what they're asking with this is how often do you run your heater or air conditioner? Do you use energy efficient appliances and lighting? Just kind of a rough idea if you. Oh, very nice. Well, that's exciting. So nice. So I'll put you above average. It's saying well insulated, efficient lighting and appliances, careful use, efficiency centered design. That's what you said. Perfect. Very exciting. Thank you. And then what percentage of your home's electricity comes from renewable sources? So solar, wind, if you have Excel, they do have the wind source program, which I keep saying I'm meaning to sign up for, but I personally haven't. So I know I have. Perfect. Yeah, I think you can, where did the mouse go again? There we go. I think you can, through Excel and Centerpoint, sign up for solar or wind, but I have not. But so I will put that. Yeah, I will put it, we'll keep it at 14. Compared to your neighbors, how much trash do you generate? We can add details to improve accuracy, which with also, I should have said at the beginning, with any of these questions, you can choose to, I don't want to answer this, but so you can, with these questions, it's asking like, how often are you buying new clothing, new household furnishings purchases, or household appliances, electronics, books, magazines, and then how much do you recycle paper and plastic? So these are the questions to get details, but we can, and it's all relative, right? Where it's like, I don't know how much trash my neighbors produce, but, but an idea. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. How far do you travel by car or motorcycle each week, Ray? Roughly. Yeah, in kilometers. Probably motorcycle much more than. Awesome. I really appreciate the thought. Yeah. That's the most accurate answer I think we've ever gotten with this question. I'm glad that question landed on you. I'm gonna assume no one has a motorcycle in this room. Okay. Gonna keep that. I don't know why it's at 3. I'm gonna put it to 0. Exactly. So what is the average fuel economy of the vehicles you use most often? Do you know how many miles per gallon? 20? Dee, dee, dee. Boop. And then still don't, well, I don't know if I can answer 0 for that. Really want to stop motorcycles. Okay, when you travel by car, how often do you carpool? Yeah. You can count your spouse if you'd like. Yeah. we'll keep it at occasionally. And then how far do you travel on public transportation each week? Does anyone take the bus or the train? It's not a very realistic option. Boop. And then how many hours do you fly each year? Back to you. I know. Yes, you can answer pre-COVID. You can choose what COVID related time you want to answer. Keep losing the mouse. There it is. Nope. Oop. Awesome. Thank you. I know it's hard to figure out, like, does it count in COVID? Or what was I doing before? It's kind of fun to go through and answer with, like, different. Yeah. Yeah, I've never figured out. Ooh, okay, so they count 200 as many. 40, which I guess if you're traveling internationally, that could, you said 40, sorry. Yeah. I was sitting next to this doesn't matter, but I was sitting next to someone on a plane before COVID, and he flew every week or home every weekend and back to, which is super common, but I'm not used to that. And I'm like, wow. From Minnesota to Portland. Why? But everyone has a different lifestyle. Okay. Thank you for answering these questions together. This, our shared answer results in Earths. And so in this program, it talks about how many Earths we would all need, or how many Earths we would need if everyone lived a lifestyle like us. And so our shared answers would require 5.7 Earths with resources. And so that can feel kind of icky. And this date is called Earth Overshoot Day. So that's when you would use up all the, by this date, we would have used as much from nature as Earth can renew in the entire year. And so that's always like, ooh. But I like to go to see details because it makes a little more sense. And what we're going to talk about is our carbon footprint. So this middle number, this CO2 emissions in tons per year, we have 15. So while I hand out Cheerios, we can switch the HDMI cord back. So I have a background in education, and so I like to have tangible examples. So if you don't want to have Cheerios, you can say no, but I'm going to hand out our 15 Cheerios for our carbon footprint. So this is roughly 15. Maybe that's 15. No. And so each Cheerio equals 1 ton of carbon. So this is our individual. I'm really not good at eyeballing how many 15 is. Our individual, that looks like, yeah, that's definitely 15. So each Cheerio represents 1 ton of carbon. And, oh, nice. It's only 6 off. Oh, I just had a brain fart. Waiting for the thing. But yeah, so each Cheerio equals 1 ton of carbon. And how did doing that test make everyone feel with like answering those questions? Yeah. Yeah. And I thank you for sharing that, because I remember when I first took that specific quiz, I was like, whoa, like it almost it's also really helpful to take a step out. So, what was your question? Oh yeah, it's a little bit more than that, but yeah. So the household is smaller amount of Cheerios, and then the systemic, which we're going to focus on the U.S. specifically, a lot more Cheerios. So we'll get there. So I want us to do a little bit of a guessing game. So we have 15 Cheerios in our hand to represent our shared carbon footprint. But according to the Nature Conservancy, do you have a guess of what the global average household footprint in number of Cheerios?
Global.
Mm-hmm. Global average. Okay. Don't focus on the Cheerios. So we got a guess of 10, we got a guess of 2 or 3. Anyone else have a guess before we reveal? You want to? 4 is the global average. And so you can take examples of countries that don't have as much consumption, or underdeveloped countries probably have a lower use of carbon. But also, if we think about more energy efficient countries like in Europe or in Asian countries that have a really well-developed public transportation system, or like their house might have a lot less reliance on energy. But in the US, for the US average household, we know it's not 4, based on what ours is. And does anyone have a guess of what the US average household is in Cheerios? 40? Good guess. It's not that high. 7? Between 7 and 40. 25, good guess. 16, so we're close to average. I have also seen some reports that it's 50. Depends on how you're calculating it, but and a lot of that, I think it's really interesting to look at the difference between the global average and the US average, and thinking about systemic, where it's like, well, we all do need cars because we don't have a very well-developed transportation system to get around. And then everyone has a different household, different relationship with consumption. So that's our individual, or the household. And so our 15 are somewhere in there close to the US average. But now we're going to take a step back and look at systemic. And to do that, we need to look at not just individual Cheerios, which represent 1 ton of carbon, but boxes of Cheerios. So does anyone have a guess, according to Google is how I found this answer, how many individual Cheerios are in 1 box of Cheerios? We'll go with about this size box. 5,000, that's a good guess. Less than 5,000. 2,772 individual Cheerios make up 1 box of Cheerios. So for these numbers that we're going to be guessing are in boxes, but that make up each. So each Cheerio represents a ton of carbon. So that's 2,772 Cheerios, or 2,772 tons per box. So now these answers are based on the 2018 reports from the EPA about greenhouse gas emissions. And so commercial and residential is the United States' 4th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And commercial and residential makes up our churches, our households, our businesses. Does anyone have a guess of how many boxes? In 2018. Total. So this is looking at the US as a whole. A whole bunch. That's the right answer. It's a whole bunch. 300,666 boxes. And so remember, each box has over 2,000, almost 3,000 Cheerios. And so that's, I always forget if it's a million or a billion, which is, I'm not a math person. So I did do the calculations for this, and I got someone check it. But, so that's 300, is it million? Individual Cheerios, or individual tons. Billion. Yes, so billion tons is US as a whole, in just commercial and residential. So transportation is the United States' #1 largest emitter, and that makes sense because, like I had mentioned earlier, we each have to have cars because we don't have a very reliable, or our systems are not set up for us to be able to reach places in a lot of cities. Public transportation, we also rely on semi-trucks and to get the things that we need. So transportation, because of reasons and many more, is our #1 largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So does anyone have a guess if commercial and residential is #4, what transportation would be #1 in box? Lower than a million. A good guess. $674,444 boxes is our #1 largest emitter. So again, individual Cheerio is in those boxes. And we have one more big number, but transportation was #1, and commercial was #4. We also have, our electricity production, our trash, our agriculture, everything else that makes up the big number of our total number of boxes, or our total greenhouse gas emissions. Does anyone have a guess of what that final big number would be in boxes? Good guess? I have a hard time remembering what the answer is. 2,408,730 boxes. Remember, each box has almost 3,000 Cheerios in it. So that is the total. So it makes our 15 a lot more manageable in our hand. And because I think, well, next slide, please. Let's take a breath. It can be overwhelming thinking about all these things. And I don't want, the goal of this is to not have shame. The goal is to just have an idea of what our individual, but also what our whole number is. And so I think what's helpful is if we put at least 1 or 2 Cheerios of our own in our own hand back in the box, that's going to reduce a whole bunch of boxes. And so that's what we can do individually that will also help systemically. Then also, how can we engage in those systemic ways to help reduce all those boxes? Because it's not on us individually, but we do have collective power to get those boxes down, because that's ridiculous. Next, please. So back to our 3-legged stool. We have practical. Do we remember the other 2? I kind of said them a second ago. So what legs make up the 3-legged stool? Yes, thank you. So practical focuses on solutions that begin at home and what you can do to reduce your household carbon footprint. I think I'm forgetting which one of you mentioned you're looking into getting solar, which is super exciting. And there's also solar co-ops are becoming more of a possibility, and I mentioned WindSource with Excel. And then ideas for practical actions, you can get an energy audit is a really good way to start. You can join solar, like I said, at-home composting is a great way, or buying or leasing an electric vehicle. A lot of things at home, and what can be fun about this is like what brings you joy. If it's gardening, you can try to introduce more native plants into your yard. You can just find ways. People that really like to-do lists tend to really like practical. So it can be fun rather than a chore, I think is important too. So systemic focuses on policy rooted in climate justice, organizing to grow the climate movement, and building institutions and structures that support climate justice. And like we were talking about before, it can feel really frustrating when we do come together and it still doesn't come through, but that doesn't mean that it's over. So it's the way I see it is the continuous coming together to support systemic actions. And that can be local, it could be state, and it could also be federally or like nationwide. And then spiritual relational is what we're doing here, is we're coming together and we're calling upon our faith traditions and community wisdom. You're bringing balance and health within ourselves. And it can include any type of gathering in worship, book groups, and community gatherings, but also it can be a walk outside to breathe with the trees and hear the birds and the raccoons. And whatever fills that heart cup of yours to stay grounded and connected to the movement. Because if we focus on those number of boxes, it can feel really heavy. But if we remember why we're focusing on, or why we think of those boxes and why we want to reduce that number, I think that's how we can ground ourselves and continue to find power in the movement. Next, please. And so I would love for us, I think we have about 10, 15 minutes left. I would just love to brainstorm, like, what does this help you think of with how you can reduce your number of Cheerios? We can put that in a... You can eat them. That's a great way to reduce your carbon footprint. So I invite you to reduce your carbon footprint by eating your Cheerios, but if you can also toss them. I should have thought about that more. Sorry. But yeah, I would love to just offer this time as a time to brainstorm together. If you want to share any practical, systemic, or relational actions you've already taken, or any ideas maybe that have come from this, or any just feelings that have come up talking about carbon footprints and taking action. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That adds up over time for sure. Like being mindful of your energy use and also figuring out how to have a positive relationship with electricity. Because we also need to live comfortably. It's not that I don't, along with not wanting to share shame, because it does feel like a tight line sometimes doing this presentation of like, oh, what's your carbon footprint? But it's not asking you to give up important, comfortable parts of our lives. Like we do need electricity and we do need to get places, but and visit family sometimes. But how can we do that more mindfully and have a better relationship? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nice. Definitely. Nice. That it has that, sorry. In Minnesota, do we go to farmers markets in this group or? Yeah. Oh yeah, yes. I know. That's such like, it feels like such a treat in Minnesota where it's like we're able to engage with that. Because I think those can definitely go hand in hand of bringing a closer relationship with food, which sometimes we don't always get the opportunity to have. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Any other, is this bringing any ideas up of, or inspiration for things to get engaged with beyond this meeting?
What they had to do was check the landfill.
Yeah.
Look a lot like what we use to repair, but
That's awesome. What process do you go through in your mind when you're thinking about your 3 R's?
place some lights in his shop with LED.
Mm-hmm.
Disassemble those.
Mm-hmm.
So the first 2 went to the hammer, which somehow, so it's completely broken down instead of bringing units for something, units plus the fact that it's, but what
Yeah.
but like breaking down all that going where it's still something at least somewhat directed to recycle.
That's awesome. It's hard to sometimes, like, personally think about how things can break down like that with, especially when you're trying to dispose of something. That's helpful to think through. Thank you for sharing. Any other, well, I like this question too, like, what do I want the future to look like? When you imagine also your household or your community specifically too, what do you want the future to look like? Yeah. 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 Thank you for sharing those hard feelings. Yeah, that's what my Oma always says. She was like, well, it's not my problem for me. But I think that's why that 3-legged stool is so important, because, you know, our changes in our households are small and relative to the changes needed to reduce those drastic effects of the climate crisis. And so when it feels hopeless because it is so big and heavy, going back to I think imagining for the future of what I want it to look like, not what I am like afraid or see the reality to be, because we hear so many devastating things about climate all the time. But I think that bringing up hope is a really important part of the movement. But that hopelessness is so real. It's heavy.
Valley is all these legs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, listening to you personally, and then systemically, like we had Sam come and talk about, you know, the systemic stuff, and some of us wrote letters, and I'm on a lot of feeds where they make it so easy to contact the legislature, so hopefully, you know, more than me is doing that. And then thirdly, the community thing, and we're trying to start a sustainability group here at Valley to talk about things that we can do, food or plastics or anything like that. So I think we're just with a bare minimum of those things. Hopefully they'll grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, planting the seeds. Definitely planting the seeds to. Oh, there's always, yeah.
These ones, I think we can throw in recycling. But yeah, I mean, there's different cups, and they come from a sustainable forestry initiative. So however they're made, they might be made from recycled products, and they can't be recycled again. You know, still better than something styrofoam. So.
Yeah. And then I think COVID has definitely brought up, like, well, how do we, it's harder to use shareable, reusable things, but so protecting, like, personal health and safety, but also being environmentally responsible, and, like, that balance. And then the balance that it goes beyond COVID, but just, it's interesting to think about that engagement too. I feel like I've had a lot of tangents in my head today, but I was listening to an interesting podcast a while ago of an environmentalist. I was like, I don't mind that there's a lot of waste in medical use, because it means I am, and people are being cared for, and it's prioritizing health, which is important. And so that waste is, even though a lot, it's not the problem, where, like, big oil and gas companies and those big institutions are more of a problem than you having a safe treatment. So just an interesting perspective that I was like, oh, because I get sometimes really focused on my individual waste, when, even though that is important, it's not necessarily the big polluter. But I do think they relate a lot.
Clothing and textile, second biggest polluter in the world.
Yeah.
And people buying new clothes all the time, throwing clothes away, and with the life of a t-shirt, with a little video they showed it. I mean, all the transportation from India to the United States, and then back to, Bangladesh to have it sewn, and then it was just incredible.
Yeah.
And, just watching that really impacted me, like, oh yeah, I am not buying all my clothes. Golden Valley used to have this orange bag thing where you could, if things were not good enough to get to a thrift store, you could still give them someplace to keep them on the landfill. And Ray, now that they don't do the orange bag, but Ray found another place that still takes those. You're going to want to get to a thrift store. And also, I think that's a small thing, but it just really makes me aware of clothing. But I don't need those.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think I heard that fast fashion goes through, I'm forgetting the number, but it was some ridiculous number, like in the double digits of seasonal clothes a year. Like, clothes seasons change dozens of times a year, so you're constantly getting new clothes that are cheap and you don't wear or you throw away, and so that's a huge part of it too. That demand, and, like, that cultural demand too. It's not just big topics. So I hope that my goal for this is to have it also be motivating and more, well, it is also a little bit of kind of how you mentioned seeing those earths, kind of like, whoo, that's a little shocking. But the goal is to leave feeling like you have some autonomy and power in this too. Which, to get a temperature check on that, how are we feeling leaving this space? Like, I feel good, I feel fine, or I feel terrible. So, yeah. Yeah, it can oscillate for sure. I do want to invite you to sign up to be a climate justice household. Like I said, we are working on a checklist to help households go through a continuous learning and acting process. And by acting, I mean taking action with ThreeLegged Stool. And so trying to help households, we're like, what can I do to engage on the practical, systemic, and relational levels. So that's the big thing we've been working on. And we try to have seasonal resource experts to connect people to. So we had our last seasonal webinar was with just talking about food and our relationship with seasonal food, specifically in the winter, which was really nice to talk about like important family recipes that like bring joy and what's important, especially for us in the winter. And that was really lovely. And then we also offer energy audits through CEE to help you get started if you would like to. So I'll invite you to sign up for the Climate Justice Household Program. And thank you for engaging with me this morning. This is